Quad seems to not have a kind of sound footing or a sense of purpose. What does it stand for?
So if you actually put this in context, the Quad could be actually seen as the kind of the counter China. So if that's the case, maybe like the other like Japan, Australia, India are the kind of like the gonna be the main player to sustain it. If they want to actually maintain the rules-based order, they are the ones like who actually try to needs to commit. I would say that the Trump administration is not going to be like the Biden administration. They are not like really concerned about the future of the international rules-based order.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to FO Live. Today's topic is making sense of the Quad through Southeast Asian eyes. My name is Haruko Satoh. I'm from the Osaka School of International Public Policy, and I'm joined by two very important and prominent scholars and policy thinker from the Philippines and from Singapore. First, it's Herman Joseph Kraft from the University of the Philippines, and Dr. Kei Koga from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Actually, I should add that Kei is also Japanese. He's been in Singapore for quite a long time. And
right.
Great.
12 years already.
Okay. It's and both of Herman and Kay are old friends, actually quite old friends in professional career terms. So I'm very much privileged to be actually moderating today's talk, which will be somewhat I wouldn't say controversial, but trying to unpack a very complex, what I might call a conundrum of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue between the United States, Australia, India, and Japan. And what we will actually focus on it will be on how Southeast Asia looks at not just Southeast Asia as a whole, but perhaps also individual countries in Southeast Asia look at the Quad, partly because when the Quad was formed, not so much in the very beginning, in early in 2006, but when it was rebooted in 2017, when it was rebooted to become more of a formal dialogue forum between these four countries. One of the obvious omissions, or what seemed to be a fundamental flaw, was that it really didn't include, or it was Southeast Asia, which is bung in the middle of the region that the Quad aspires to cover, which is the Indo-Pacific. This also, for me, personally speaking, the four countries were also asymmetrical, with very little bilateral or even sort of quadrilateral tradition of dialogue or cooperation. If anything, I also thought that South Korea would have been more of a natural partner if it weren't for, at the time, Japan and Korea's rather troubled relationship under President Moon and Prime Minister Abe. Nonetheless, I think, however much the Quad sort of started in a rather, well, not troubled, but at least it's in some sort of circumstances in which people read into the Quad as something that surrounds or contains China. I think the issue remains, even to this day, which is almost like 8 years running, that the Quad seems to not have a kind of sound footing or a sense of purpose. What does it stand for? What sort of confidence does it inspire, if any, to the countries that the Quad is supposed to be cooperating with? And I think one of the major partners that are affected is basically the ASEAN member states. So today, basically, I would like to sort of turn from Herman and to Kay to ask a few questions about what the Quad looks like and what are the main things or concerns that ASEAN sees in the Quad. And please interrupt me or interrupt the conversation if you want to say something that the others haven't said. Okay, so I would first like to start with Herman. Uh, with
Yeah.
so sorry because I think there's a question that comes later about the U.S., Japan, Philippines, some of the securitization of these multilateral
Mm,
initiatives. So I would sort
right.
of so from the Philippines, please.
Okay. So Haruko, thank you for inviting me to this podcast and the opportunity to actually have this discussion on the Quad. The interesting thing about how the Quad is perceived in Southeast Asia is that it can't be separate perceptions across the region with regards to the intensifying competition between the United States and China. So some of the perceptions about is actually influenced by attitudes, not relationship. And so we can talk about the Quad as actually being more than. I mean, I think the perception is that it's very much associated with security around the region. But of course, as we, I think for those who are much more familiar with it, there is an attempt to actually go beyond questions of security and politics, right? The idea of trying to provide public goods, for instance, within the region is something that's a key ingredient as far as the attempts to, I guess, dilute that perception about the Quad as primarily being about regional security, and therefore move it away from the notion that it is an anti-China kind of arrangement. We talk about it as a minilateral in that kind of context, right? Um, but the interesting thing about the way that the Quad is perceived in Southeast Asia is that it revolves around a number of particular issues, right? And for this, I'm actually making reference to a survey that's conducted annually by the Institute for Southeast Asian Studies based in Singapore, the State of Southeast Asia survey. So the one that was actually conducted in 2025 and previous years actually talked about attitudes towards the Quad. And I think a key element here is that a number of issues that have actually arisen has to do with precisely the way that the Quad is seen in the context of that competition, right? And so many of the issues revolve around things that have to do with number one, of course, whether the Quad is actually going to somehow threaten ASEAN centrality and compete with ASEAN-led mechanisms. No, and number two, no, is that somehow this question of that competition between China and the United States might mean that um, activities of the Quad might actually promote a choice making process, no, which might actually make countries around the region actually choose between China and the United States. In which case, it might actually lead to some sort of provocation, or at least provoke China into becoming more assertive and aggressive about its actions around the region. Having said that, now going back to that survey, the interesting thing is that not many of the people who responded to that survey, and the target respondents of this survey is actually regional or at least experts around the region, no, on questions that have to do with economics, security, no, and things like that. But the interesting thing here is that while those issues were emerged, no, in that survey, right? And this goes back to something that we were talking about earlier on. Um, most most of these experts actually saw the Quad in, or at least the conversation was that the Quad can contribute, or at least a large, a more significant number. We're saying that the Quad can contribute positively, right, to the region. And I think this is seen in terms of if the Quad emphasizes the provision of public goods, then well and good, right? It can work in a complementary manner with ASEAN, and therefore fears of threatening ASEAN centrality can in fact be mitigated by the way that it works with ASEAN, right? And then, of course, to a certain extent, this also actually works with the question of the competition, right? That in fact, if the Quad works with ASEAN and that partnership actually works well, right? Then this contributes quite well, in a positive manner, to mitigating the more egregious effects of the competition between China and the United States. Now, of course, across ASEAN countries, no, the attitude is actually not consistent, right? So Vietnam, the Philippines, no, and some other countries actually see Quad in a more positive light. But I think this is seen in the context of precisely how the Quad will actually be seen as being able to provide or to at least focus on the provision of public goods, and not on the issue of on the issue of regional security. But this is less. I mean, this kind of positive perception, changes as we move to continental Southeast Asia, where there is a little bit more concern about what the Quad is all about. Now, if you talk about Laos, Cambodia, as well as Thailand, right? So, in other words, again, the issue here is that the Quad is seen differently across the ASEAN states, right? And while there is a significant number of experts across the region who actually see the Quad in a positive light, right? This now actually changes if you look at specific countries around the region, right? So there's more sympathy, for the Quad when you talk about the Philippines, and Vietnam, but less so if we go to Thailand, Cambodia, as well as in Laos.
Thank you. Well, I think that pretty much covers like sort of the diversity, and I'm sort of sensing that it very much depends on, for example, the country's relationship with the United States,
Yeah,
particularly with
yeah,
Vietnam and the Philippines. But we'll sort of put that in the back burners for the time being. And I'd like to turn to Kay about, well, something that adds to, and also particularly because you've been doing a lot of writing and research on minilaterals and multilateralism, and you are very much versed in the U.S.-Japan relations, and so I would like to also very much like to get your view on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me this interesting podcast. I actually excited to kind of talk about the minilateral and Quad the issues with the people who are interested in this the topic. But then first of all, I think the in terms of the Quad, I guess I probably need to kind of talk a bit about the historical development of the Quad, because that is going to be pretty important to understand what it is, and the why there's a divergences in the opinions in Southeast Asia, and then how they actually view the Quad in a different way. The one thing is that the Quad was, as the Haruko-san talked about, in 2017 it was kind of resurrected. So the 2017 it was resurrected because of the United States under the Trump administration, and then also the other three countries, the Australia, India, Japan, were a bit concerned about the uncertainty about the evolving strategic landscape in the Pacific and beyond. So in that sense, they actually started to kind of talk informally with each other, and then in the context of that, the United States actually issued the national security strategy in 2017 that actually emphasized the China and Russia as a revisionist power in the international system. While like the Japan has already kind of launched the concept of free and open in the Pacific, which try to kind of emphasize initially try to emphasize the importance of the like-minded states cooperation, particularly the Australia, Japan, United States, and India. So if you actually put this in context, the Quad could be actually seen as the kind of the counter-China the institution or counter-China grouping. And then this the image first impression actually got like really embedded in the many countries in Southeast Asia. And then the people actually started to understand, okay, so if we are actually pushing this kind of Quad cooperation into the counter China, then the Quad might not be actually received well, like in many regions of the world. And then they started to actually kind of change or shift their narratives so that they are suddenly, or like from the 2018, the Quad countries emphasize the importance of the ASEAN centrality, and then try to talk about the regional kind of norms and rules, and then under the Biden administration, they started to have the different types of the working group, which could provide the public goods, as the Herman actually talked about. So in that sense, the unilateral has been changing. I mean, this Quad actually the characteristics has been changing, but because the first impression was so strong, so that like still like many people actually doubt about the yes, the Quad is trying to do something like good, but then maybe like in the hindsight, they're actually aiming at the country in China. And then this kind of narrative has been going on. And then that's why like the Southeast Asia has been kind of seeing the Quad differently. And then some countries which closely monitor the development of the Quad would actually say, yeah, I mean, Quad has changed, so like we may be able to actually have certain kind of like cooperation with each other. But then the others actually who don't actually see the Quad development still consider the Quad as a counter-China policy, grouping. So I think like this is a kind of the differences that like we actually see in the Southeast Asia right now. It's not like they're monolithic, but it's actually they have the different opinions, and then that's all because the Quad has been evolving, and then again like it could be evolve again like in under the new kind of Trump administration too. So we'll see like this kind of uncertainty creates the mixed feeling or mixed opinions about the Quad.
Well, I think the other thing I wanted to ask, partly because I just mentioned about the relationship with the United States, because the Quad is also, with the misperception aside, um, the countering China is definitely the one country, apart from India. Countering China has many gradations, right? The perceptions. I mean, Japan. Yes, we express threats, security
Mm-hmm.
threats. We feel very unsettled sometimes, but at the same time, this, for example, Japan and Korea are the two very close allies to the United States that also maintain very, very integrated economic ties with China. So that sort of simplistic, well, is it sort of encircling China and so on and so forth, sometimes distracts, I think, from what even the Quad is trying to do and what benefits it would bring to Southeast Asia. So I'd like to go back to come back to UK a bit about how you see the as you mentioned, the Trump administration, but particularly the role of the United States, not just in perhaps instigating another evolution or demise of the Quad vis-a-vis how it handles its relations with China?
Yes. Um, so yeah, that's a really difficult question. I'm kind of trying to figure out the what kind of role the Trump administration right now, like Trump 2.0, is going to assign to the Quad. And the for now, the I'm not really sure. And also the one thing like I would say is that the Trump administration is not going to be like the Biden administration. They are not like really concerned about the future of the international rules-based order, or they don't actually consider the so-called liberal international order is really important for the U.S. kind of interest or so. And then that actually creates certain I think the not like the division, but then the certain kind of the differences in the future direction of the Quad among the member states. I think the consensus that the Quad member states had in the past is that yes, I mean there's a degradation like in terms of the country in China, but like, at least like they actually try to stick to the maintaining or enhancing the rules-based international order. But now the United States was kind of like the out of that the scope, so that the to what extent they could actually manage the those kind of like relationship among the four countries in terms of the maintaining the international order. And what I actually would see is that the Trump administration still like has some kind of the consideration about the Quad. I guess they actually trying to have some of the area of cooperation intact, like the emerging and technological the advanced technologies, critical technologies, and also the maritime security issues, which can be beneficial for their own kind of national interest, and then they could actually create the certain supply chain resilience through these kind of like the critical for the technology, and then for the maritime security, they may actually engage some of the regional states so that they could actually maintain balance of power in their favor. But then the climate and also the other kind of the more kind of public goods kind of the part of the corporation, they might not be able to actually commit. So if that's the case, maybe like the other like Japan, Australia, India are the kind of like the gonna be the main player to sustain it. If they want to actually maintain the rules-based order, they are the ones like who actually try to needs to commit. And then if they don't, then they are probably like the Quad is going to shift toward more like the balance of power-based kind of grouping that could be seen as the yeah, I mean, countering China or like countering the particular threats in the Pacific. So I think like right now it's a really the strange kind of time because we don't know where the United States is going in terms of their multilateral engagement. But then I guess that's why like I think the middle powers or like the non-great powers have the more kind of role to play if they actually want to maintain goods providers in the
Mm. I mean, yeah,
Sam,
thanks. Yep, go ahead, Herman.
Haruko, just to add to what Kay has said, right? I mean, I agree very much that this is really a question of what the attitude of President Trump is going to be all about, right? I mean, if you go back to the Biden administration, the key element there that differentiated the Biden administration from Trump 1.0 was the emphasis on working with allies, right? That was actually seen in the Indo-Pacific strategy, for instance, no, and so on. And this is precisely where there is a digression, right? In how the Trump administration 2.0 seems to see the way that it intends to actually navigate relations within not just the Indo-Pacific, no, but generally around the world, right? The notion, and I agree with Kay, this notion of maintaining the rules-based order, a liberal order, doesn't seem to be something that the Trump administration is actually willing to push forward, right? And so from the U.S. Approach now to foreign policy seems to be all about bilateral relations, basically, right? So even allies going to be are not going to be immune to criticisms, no, as well as to policies, no, on the part of the United States, no, that would force its allies to concede certain things, no, as per the demand of the Trump administration. This includes things like, for instance, increasing defense spending, for instance, right? And so, in other words, there is less an emphasis on working with allies, with strategic partners, and therefore, and we saw this already in Trump 1.0, the tendency to be suspicious of multilaterals, right? And therefore, what we're seeing now, I mean, the interesting thing about the Quad was that it was, to a certain extent, a response to criticisms about ASEAN being unable to push forward strategic policies, right? And so it was necessary to have minilaterals, right? Groupings of partners that would actually make more operational decisions, no, on issues that ASEAN seems to be stuck on normative elements or aspirational elements all the while. So the interesting thing here is that, and this is part of what I was saying earlier on, and Kay pointed this out as well. The suspicions towards the Quad was based on this particular element, that unilaterals, the more there are of them, no, the more that they dilute, ASEAN centrality and ASEAN's ability to actually provide leadership, no, to the region. But I think the interesting thing here is the United States was one of the main, if not the main, promoter, no, of the Quad. And now you have a president who's not really interested in working with allies, right? And so I suspect that the tendency would be, and we saw this in the national security strategy that just came out a few weeks ago, right? There is absolutely no reference to working with allies, no, and so the Quad becomes less a priority, no, in terms of what of strategies that the U.S. would intend to actually work on, no, as far as their Indo-Pacific strategy is concerned. So yeah, it's interesting in that sense, and I think I agree with Kay. The question here is whether Japan and Australia, it's the idea of the spokes, right? The hub and spoke system. The spokes actually speaking to each other now, right? But the question is whether the spokes by themselves, would be seen as being capable of being more influential, in working with ASEAN in order to try to maintain this rules-based order within, at least within the region, right? So that's the concern here, and I think and I think the issue of dividing ASEAN is really based on this notion that there has to be something that the ASEAN countries must collectively believe in, that could actually sustain the existing order. Otherwise, they are going to choose their own directions, right? As far as foreign policy is concerned.
Well, I think, yes, thank you. I mean, never mind the questions I prepared. I'm now having more questions. So I'd like to sort of combine two questions I've just popped in my head. One is the mutual, or the level of mutual understanding between the United States and ASEAN, because I think Kay also mentioned earlier, and you also, Herman, about America's sort of sporadic, if patchy understanding and attention span towards Southeast Asia. I was actually in about, I don't know, when the Quad was rebooted, and I was in Tokyo for some workshop organized by CSIS, and we had somebody come from the United States, and basically they were saying, well, ASEAN is just a talk shop and they don't do anything. That summarized everything. I'm like, okay. But nevertheless, there is, America or the European Union, they would like to compare these structured multilateral institutions as opposed to ASEAN, which, for what reason, it remains a balancing act amongst each other, but it does serve, at least in Asia, has served a critical role, for example, to bring Japan, Korea, and China to sit on the same table in the 1990s, right? So there is something that works, and we might not be able to articulate it or say, well, this is the ASEAN way, but nonetheless, I think there's a virtue in having ASEAN in the way that and how it works. But on the other hand, we have the United States that tends to see everything in terms of whatever comparative terms with like NATO or EU and so on, all the multilateral institutions that they set up and they don't join. And the Quad seems increasingly looking like something like what became the TPP. Right? The TPP, America left, and Japan took up the ball and decided, okay, we'll do CPTPP. So I'm just curious about how much do you think there needs to be, and never mind Trump 2.0, but America's sort of understanding of Asia as a whole, and I don't mean to offend my American friends, but just putting it out there, and particularly in terms of how it understands the dynamic between countries like Japan and South Korea and relations with ASEAN countries. So that's one. And the other thing is going to that Quad. So can Japan and Australia, or even India, if America decides to somehow not abandon, but at least take the back seat, would be able to, I think most importantly, work together to somehow maintain the if not the liberal order, at least the rule-based order, which I think remains a challenge. And I personally think that we should bring in Korea. But anyway, so nonetheless, I'm going to put these two sort of questions to you, and who would like to take up? Okay, Kei-san, go ahead.
Yeah, so just the kind of quickly about the important two questions. So the one question on the U.S. perspective on the international institution is they tend to see the international institution as the just kind of problem-solving groupings. So if you are not actually solving the problems, then like that's useless. So that's why like the ASEAN is considered as the kind of the talk shop, yes, and then like without actually getting into the other real kind of like the program also. But then in a way, like when we actually talk about the diplomacy and when we think about the diplomatic process, the talking itself actually has certain kind of utility, like the mitigating the tensions and then trying to actually the buy the time to think about the fundamental issues and then what to do with that, and then if the they could actually understand if the timing is right to solve the problem too. So if we actually put this kind of utilities in the international institutions like ASEAN, then probably like we could actually see more values like in the from the ASEAN. And then as the Haruko-san said, we actually see the ASEAN's kind of utility because the ASEAN brought the external powers rival powers like the Japan, China, and also the South Korea and the United States, the bunch of the major powers, even Russia too. So if that's the case, I think like ASEAN still has their some utilities, and then this is a kind of something that like we need to actually keep the kind of talking about it, because the sometimes the international institution is kind of like the this is type of the IR theories, or like the academic kind of understanding of international institution. They actually put the theories, and then like if theory doesn't say speak about their other utilities, they think like it's useless, but like it's not. So I think the again like we need to actually consider the many other like the factors that the sometimes like IR theories or like the those kind of the academic the thinking are missing. So that's the one for the I think the that's the something that like we I think the I know like there are many Asianists like in the United States understands this, but then if it got to the more kind of high level policy making,
Mm, mm,
like lose this kind of like nuances. So that's the one. The second thing is that the Quad. I think that is possible. I mean, probably like the Quad is going to be can be dormant. Maybe the United States is not going to get involved in, and then the other three countries can actually get together. But actually, this happens when we see the Japan, Australia, India trilateral cooperation before the Quad was resurrected in 2017. They had a certain kind of cooperative framework to talk about the strategic issues and economic issues, and then even when the Quad was kind of created after the 2017, then the Australia, Japan, India continue to talk about their kind of like the interest in the Pacific, and then the after 2020 they came up with the some agreement called the SCRI, the Supply Chain Resiliency the Initiative, and that is the something they could do. And then after that, like they stopped kind of meeting, like at least like the formally. So the but then the reason is because the I guess the Quad actually started to institute the more kind of working groups in the itself, and then there's no need to actually talk about it. So when we see the United States actually disengaging from this kind of Quad framework, maybe there's going to be more incentive for other three countries to talk about the cooperation based on their national interest, and also as well as the rules-based order, hopefully, so that we could actually see more kind of stable expectation of the state behavior in the Pacific and future. So that's to the kind of the points I would like to make.
Mm. Herman?
yeah, yeah. I agree with Kay. In fact, I think the issue for, well, just taking it from the point of view of the Philippines right now, and I think this is one of the interesting things about the case of ASEAN, the diversity across its membership in terms of attitudes, no, towards uh, the United States in particular, but to institutions like the Quad as well, right? I think, um, like I said earlier on, the State of Southeast Asia survey actually showed that the Philippines is one of the countries that actually showed or thought about the Quad as having a beneficial impact on the region. And I think compared to other countries like Vietnam, for instance, or Singapore, the case of the Philippines might actually be more inclined towards the security side of things rather than the economic side of the calculus for Quad, which to a certain extent, no, aligns the Philippines more um, uh, 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 with the issues that Japan, no, Australia, no, even India actually has, no, towards China, and so shaping the commonality in terms of how to perceive the value of the Quad, no, largely in terms of the impact of China on the region, in particular in the bilateral relation between the Philippines and China. So the Philippines is not representative. This kind of attitude is not really representative of what most countries in ASEAN actually has. As far as this issue towards the US is concerned. Even though, like I said, if you take a look at the State of Southeast Asia survey, Vietnam and the Philippines are actually the same, right? On this particular attitude towards Quad. But it's an interesting issue precisely because I think for most countries around the region, right? This issue with Trump. Take a look at the case of Malaysia. In when it held that summit, that ASEAN summit, summit in last a few months ago, right? When Trump actually, they were able to convince Trump to actually come to Malaysia. The purpose of it was or at least the ostensible purpose was to get him to sign, an economic agreement, which to a large extent didn't really do anything for Malaysia because in the end it was all about making sure that there would be no additional tariffs to Malaysia that the United States would actually impose on. So in other words, the idea of and this goes back to what Kay was saying earlier on. American attitudes, are towards ASEAN, right? Is shaped by the fact that there is no problem-solving element to ASEAN, right? It was necessary for Trump to come here because he had to sign that economic agreement with Malaysia, nothing more, right? But it has nothing to do with the strategic environment, with shaping cooperation across the region, right? Or ensuring that the United States would be on board, as far as ASEAN programs are actually concerned, such as they are, right? And I think even as we are, the Philippines is actually a treaty ally of the United States. We have the same kind of calculation, right? We're not thinking in terms of ASEAN. We're chairing ASEAN next year, right? And to a large extent, our calculations are shaped, by not so much by how we think ASEAN should actually address its relationship with China and the United States, but the Philippines itself, how it can actually put within the ASEAN agenda. It's a tight rope, so to speak, right? And I think this is partly the problem of ASEAN. If we're talking about how ASEAN navigates its relationship, with the Quad countries, as well as of course with China and the United States, that the bilateral concerns, the bilateral interests, actually get in the way of calculations, for the region that the organization and the member countries themselves should actually put front and center. I've always said that the argument, the issue of ASEAN centrality, right? And I agree with Kay. ASEAN still has a convening power, which nobody can match within the region, and that I think is the central element, of ASEAN centrality, right? That convening power. But nonetheless, I think the issue here is that is only something that can be sustainable if the ASEAN countries themselves make sure that ASEAN is central to their foreign policy, right? And the problem is that it tends to be superseded by their bilateral relations now with the major powers. I think a big issue right now for ASEAN is, of course, this conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, right? ASEAN has always prided itself in the fact that its success can be measured, or one of its main metrics for success is that countries around the region have not gone to war or engaged in armed conflict with one another. Now we have this issue with Thailand and Cambodia, which threatens, if not completely, is already, seems to um, uh, uh, seems to show that core element of ASEAN success is crumbling at this point in time, right? Or at least as far as the Cambodia issue is concerned. But I think that's the point that has to be addressed right now. That if ASEAN is central to all our foreign policies, no, then that means it behooves us to actually define what the strategic interests of ASEAN and the ASEAN countries are, which at this point in time we have not really done, and therefore makes us vulnerable. If you're talking about regional resilience, it makes us not resilient to influence peddling, by the great powers, right? And so the work that needs to be done with the Quad countries, no, um, includes being able to buttress ASEAN and ASEAN centrality. No, something that I am not sure is something that that a Quad without the United States, no, would be in a strong position to do so.
Mm. Mm. I mean, I think as this case I was talking about some of the theoretical constructs, ASEAN is
Yeah,
actually the quintessential international society, right?
yeah,
It's not, it's the most sort of, the English school constructivist type of international society. But I think perhaps, as you say, Herman, that sometimes ASEAN, the member states cannot put the interest or the ASEAN in center of their international foreign policies. Yeah, the stuff with Thailand and Cambodia is it's I think it's very worrying, though. I didn't think the seams to be cracking from
mm,
on the continental ASEAN members. I thought it'll be more of the maritime versus the continental countries, but we shall have to see how it goes. But since you bring up the Philippines, because I think Philippines acutely, in a way, express that the one side of that divergent view, not just towards the US and China, but also it is one of the countries that are more militarized by these
yeah,
developments at the moment. And one of the questions that I think we sent you was sort of about whether ASEAN is comfortable, ASEAN member states are comfortable with these treaty-based security arrangements as opposed to something that is more informal.
mm-hmm,
Because I'm looking at it not just from an ASEAN perspective, and I'd also like to ask Keisan about it, is that all the stuff that's going on in the past couple of years with this remilitarization of a lot of the politics around the region, just because, well, it is China, but it is, I think it takes two to tango to get into these kind of situations. That whether there are, for example, the Quad is in any way helping to not go towards that sort of more militarized situation where we start talking about, Asian NATO, collective
yeah,
security, blah, blah,
mm-hmm,
blah, as if, we forget ARF and all of that stuff. Or, in a way, listening to both of you, it seems like Quad is a kind of a noise. No,
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
noise meaning that it's not making everybody focus, but rather it's like because it exists in the way it does,
yeah,
utility or non-utility, it just seems to be distracting everybody's attention. I
Mm.
I
um,
I I might be short, but anyway. So I'm just going to sort of put my thinking aloud to you,
um,
and
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess part of the issue really is that okay, you started with the Philippines, right? And if you take a look at the Philippines and attitudes towards Quad, right? I think the Philippines is one of the countries in Southeast Asia, if not the country in Southeast Asia, that's more aligned with the with what Kay was saying. The Quad is being accused of being, right. That is to say that it's an anti-China kind of thing,
Mm.
and the base is of course the hubs and spokes system of alliances that the United States has in place. And so this contributes to all of this conversation about a NATO, an Asia Pacific NATO or something to that effect, right? Um, to your question about how comfortable are the Southeast Asian countries about this, clearly they're not, right? I mean, if we're talking about across ASEAN, they're not. Even I think in the Philippines, we're not comfortable with that notion because it it contributes to the polarization of the region, right? A polarization could easily contribute to a slide towards crisis, no, and then of course the possibility of armed conflict. Um, so we're very careful about, and I think this from a Filipino looking at the way that the Philippines is talking about, or at least Philippine experts are talking about the Quad, the relationship, our relationship with China and with the United States, and our relationship with ASEAN, right? Um, I'm one of my big concerns is the way that conversations in the Philippines now tends to be focused too much on what goes on in the South China Sea, right? And therefore, it's very much it very much shapes how we look at our strategic environment with a focus on the not so friendly relationship that we have with China right now, and therefore emphasizing the need for us to deepen our relationship with the United States. Hence, your point about the deepening militarization, right, of our approach to regional security. Um, uh, I don't want to be defensive about it, but to a large extent, the argument in the Philippines is that we don't have a choice, right? We're a small country, we're being pushed into this kind of situation, and therefore, to go back to what Kay was actually saying, right? A realist approach to this whole thing demands that we actually seek allies, to be able to balance with China, right? In other words, we're no longer that confident, in ASEAN mechanisms
Mm.
to actually maintain regional security, right? So we talk about the ARF, the ADMM plus, all of these mechanisms that are supposed to be dialogue mechanisms that will lead to understanding, across and the mitigation of areas of dispute amongst the ASEAN countries, with their partners. So it's a difficult situation for the Philippines to be in, right? Precisely because I think a Lowy Institute study that was conducted last year shows that the Philippines is an outlier as far as attitudes, especially towards China, amongst the ASEAN countries, right? Which basically means, that our approach to what we're doing with regards to our security interests, our claims as far as the that part of the South China Sea, which we refer to as the West Philippine Sea, is concerned, is something that is seen by many of our ASEAN partners, as actually contributing to the heightening of tension,
Mm.
right? And the bringing in of polarized politics, because our approach of actually strengthening our relationship with the United States, and therefore, right, supporting that part of the Quad, which is really all about the more security aspect of it, right? That we see that as being more in our interest right now, given the situation that we're actually facing. And so Um, that's the reason why you now have this conversation, and we're part of that conversation, right? Where we have that trilateral talks between Japan, the Philippines, and the United States. No, and aside from that, no, this notion of a version of the Quad, which takes out India, replaces it with the Philippines, now which we talk about as the Squad,
The
right?
squad.
Which seems to be much more security oriented than the Quad is, right? So let's just say that our chairman, the chairing of ASEAN by the Philippines next year is going to be interesting, precisely because of this, the way that we're going to try to navigate all of these issues together. But at the same time, be able to push this as part of the ASEAN agenda, or to push an ASEAN agenda that would at least give some consideration for these kinds of issues.
Thank you. Kei, Kei-san, would you like
So
to
yeah,
add?
no, I completely agree with the Herman. They are talking about the kind of the quads and squads and in the context of the ASEAN. I just kind of would like to add some kind of interesting development that we kind of saw in the Philippines position, like within the ASEAN. I guess the 2010s or 2011s, like when the power shifts was occurring, and then but then the Philippines was actually perceiving more kind of like rising threat China in the South China Sea, and then they talk about South China Sea within the ASEAN platform, and then many actually concerned about this issue because I mean like other countries had a good relation with the China, and why like are you talking about the South China Sea issues in this kind of platform, and then so it was seen as kind of like the troublemaker at the beginning, but then like over time as the kind of like ASEAN countries started to see the change in the strategic environment, they seem to agree with what the Philippines what has been doing. So at first, like the Philippines try to solve the South China Sea within the ASEAN,
On our
which
own.
yes, but then it was not like able to do this. So they actually brought it into the international platform, the arbitration tribunal, and then they actually got their positive outcome. But at the same time, ASEAN was not like wholeheartedly supporting the outcome. And then with this kind of international law, the Philippines actually thought we could actually at least like to some extent stabilize the situation in the South China Sea, which was not the case. So at the end of the day, like they need to actually be more like the advocate about their strengthening its capabilities to push back the China's encroachment. So seeing this kind of development, some of the ASEAN countries are not like comfortable with that because they are actually started to get involved in the more kind of the muscular way or like the military way or like a law enforcement way to deter this kind the Chinese the advancement. So but then at the same time they understand it. So there's some kind of like mixed feeling that like ASEAN actually is really the uncomfortable with the development like we are seeing. That the Philippines are actually getting closer to the more kind of U.S. allies and then also United States. They are getting more kind of military the capabilities or law enforcement capabilities. But then what else can ASEAN do? And then so this is a kind of like the situation we are having, and then the Quad and then also the Squad can be seen from that kind of light. I guess that's the situation. And then another thing is if this is the case, and then like my concern is a bit if this is the case, and if the ASEAN countries started to see this actually resonate with what the Herman said like previously. But if this is the case, then ASEAN might be going to lose. Okay, so probably like ASEAN is not going to be enough. So we have to actually kind of get close to the other regional organizations, other kind of countries like the China or Russia or the BRICS or whatever. Then started to kind of dilute the importance of the ASEAN. And then if they actually lose their faith in the ASEAN's utility, like in the Pacific, then it is going to erode like internally. So I think like
Yeah.
this is going to be like really concern, and then I hope the next chair, the Philippines, is going to resurrect the redefine the reason the top of the ASEAN, and
Yeah.
also external actors like Japan they're supporting, because I think the objectively speaking, the ASEAN is still important. I mean, convening power, it might not solve again like the problem, but then it actually provides the opportunity to have the conversation and the discussion,
Mm, mm,
and
mm,
particularly under
mm.
this really uncertain international the environment. It is really important to actually have some conversation and then get the real program, and also the what to do with this kind of program like in the future.
Right.
So to start with, I think the conversation is really important.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm. Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything we wanted to ask you. Apart from just because we started off with the Quad, which seems in the natural course is that, well, it's not that relevant. Partly because it's not, I personally confess I never understood it. Partly because with the Sumatra stuff, it's okay. You have all these four countries coming together,
Mm,
but I've always been troubled by this. How can all of a sudden these four countries get together?
yeah,
For
Yeah.
what purpose? India's non-aligned. Australia's tiny. I mean, it might be a big country continent-wise, but population-wise, it's just under the population of Tokyo, right? And and I think because Quad was followed by not followed followed by AUKUS,
Mm.
which is the other more security, UK,
Yeah.
Australia, US, the Anglo-Saxons coming back to Asia. I think it, you know, at the time when, Kaysen was talking about, at the time, some of these embedded image of encircling China has stuck. And I don't think that the four countries need to sort of put energy into reinventing Quad per se, but rather that perhaps in the absence of America's full attention,
Mm, mm,
Japan, Australia, and India could actually work more closely talking to ASEAN countries. Because at the end, one thing I think that's really missing at the moment, amongst all of this tension buildup, is no one's really talking to each other about them, right? I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
how do we bring down the threat perception that China has about and why they feel they need to be so aggressive or assertive? And so we are, I think, as we in a very interesting transitional period when the tried and tested way of looking at the hub and spokes is even changing.
Mhm.
And ASEAN also might be going through a mild crisis. So I am just going to ask the two of you just very shortly. So what do you think would be a likely scenario for the Quad in the next
okay.
5 years?
Um,
Oh, no, sorry,
okay.
sorry. Let's not say that. Not about that. What would you like the Quad to be, if anything?
Um, hmm.
Disappear or just
um, if it is purposive, right? Meaning to say that if the Quad countries actually come together and try to make something of, and I think at this point in time, um, over the short term, it is about Japan, Australia, and India. Realistically speaking, it is Japan and Australia, right? Trying to make to make headway as far as influencing the region, then uh, the best scenario for them would actually be working with ASEAN. Although, realistically speaking, given the situation of ASEAN right now, I'm not too sure just how much that kind of scenario can actually work out. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that if Japan and Australia can work together with ASEAN to buttress ASEAN, right, to help ASEAN basically sustain its own, to increase its own resilience and its sustainability as a regional actor, that would be a major contribution, I think, to the region. That's not to say, of course, that all of this would somehow transform the current strategic environment, which really revolves around the competition between China and the United States right now.
Mm.
But if there is that effort, and I think the Philippines can get behind that, then it creates the possibility of somehow mitigating the more egregious effects of the China US rivalry. What can't take into consideration, though, is basically the unpredictability of Donald Trump. So that's just one of the things that we can't make any real allowances for, as far as that's concerned. But like I
That's
said,
that's everybody's problem.
but if Japan and Australia can somehow work with ASEAN, then I think that's going to be a significant factor towards trying to maintain some sort of balance within the region.
Mm. Mm. Okay, Sam.
Yes. So previously I thought Quad can cooperate with the ASEAN, which was I actually wrote the piece in the foreign policy with one of the researcher in the ICS, talking about maybe like there should be some kind of institutional linkage between ASEAN and Quad, because Quad now at that time was focused on the more public goods provisions, global health, HADR. Those are the kind of places that the issues that the ASEAN has been interested in. But now that I'm not really sure how much United States is going to commit to this public goods provision, and then how much resources they are going to provide. So I don't know. I mean, for the future of the Quad, I'm not saying like the abandon it, but then I think I'm just kind of leave it as like go with the flow. So I think maybe like we don't have to because there's no the harm to maintain it. Maybe like you may have to kind of spend some of the diplomatic resources or time for the cooperation or coordination, but then still like they have close linkage, or they could actually have the channels of communications with each other. So just leave it. But then if there's a certain areas of cooperation among the other countries, like even the Australia, Japan. As Herman said, and Australia, Japan, India, to some extent, like if there's some kind of issue, the cooperative area, they could actually formulate another kind of informal one. And I would guess this is going to lead the like proliferation of the many kind of groupings and many multilaterals. And then that is not like in from the efficient perspective or the perspective of the efficiency, then it might not be good. But I guess that's a kind of something like we probably need to do in the future because of the heightened uncertainties in the world. We have to kind of hedge against the kind of risks that like we would face like in the future. And by creating the linkage between the countries, that could actually again like use the channels communication, and also the communication lines that when like you can use like in times of the particular contingency. So I guess unfortunately, like there's no kind of best way to actually interact or like maintain the Quad right now. But then just kind of maintain it. But then other kind of possibility can be solved out.
Mm, mm. No, I mean, I agree. I agree with both of you. And I think, and as I said, I keep on saying we have to bring in Korea.
Korea, yes. Yeah. So, yeah, Korea is actually really important.
And I do think that this is really been informative. And I do think that it made me think also, not twice, but 3 times, 4 times, about not just the Trump administration, but as we look really project towards the future, the utility, the stuff that we owe this region, and I'm going to say Asia, owes to ASEAN, and the big transition we're making from China sort of trying to feel more like a confident and comfortable power, which I think it isn't at the moment. And then America is having its own crisis. And where, as Kaysen said, middle powers, middle meaning not just size, but, middle compared to these big whales, bears, whatever, is, I think, at the end, I'm actually really glad it really all boils down to dialogue, right? It's not about, let's get more gunboats, let's get, this, I think, is something that gives, at least, it should give a lot more hope at the end of this year, of such a tumultuous year. And I really would like everybody more to take this sort of diplomacy a lot more seriously, because it's just lacking. And we have to come back to talk about the Philippine Championship of ASEAN.
You should.
So, thank you very much, Herman and Kay, at coming together at such short notice. But I hope this was worthwhile and fruitful. It was really, really food for thought. A lot of food for thought for me. And so we will. Did you have any last words?
Oh, no, we're fine.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So, have a happy holiday season, and hopefully, we can get together again and examine the agenda for Philippines, because I think that actually merits how, setting out what said about the difficulties of what Philippines is facing. I think it's quite important that we also articulate it, because. Okay, so thank you very much again, and just let me say, so this actually podcast is also part of our OSIP's Korea Foundation project on peace and human security towards a meaningful Japan-Korea partnership, which actually was a project that was it's already closed, but we're delivering these slightly late because the project finished last year, but everything changed because we had 2 prime ministers, a new president. Everything we did just didn't have any meaning. So anyway, thank you again, and hope to catch up with both of you in person. Kaysen, I'm coming to Singapore in February if you're around.
Yes, yeah.
But
please let me know. Yeah, I'm not. I'm gonna be in and out, but please let me know.
Yes. Okay. So thank you again.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.